How much rest should you take between intervals in a running workout? Should you stand, jog, or walk? Should you go by time or distance in your recovery to know how much time or distance to take? These are some of the questions I want to get into in this episode of the Knighton Runs podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this show. My name is Coach Chris, and if you enjoy this show, the best way to get in touch with me and follow along with everything I'm doing is through my website at knightonruns.com. You can download a free copy of my marathon training book, Run Faster Marathons, The Proven Path to PR, and join my email list when you do so. And I am planning on making a podcast episode like this each week. So be sure you subscribe to the Knighton Runs podcast. Today's episode is a continuation on my series talking about designing workouts. And in this episode, I'm going to specifically be talking about the recovery periods in workouts, the recovery periods in interval workouts specifically. So this is something that I really think most people don't understand, or they don't have a clear framework for why recovery periods are what they are. It's important, whether you're an athlete or a coach, to understand why you're doing every aspect of the workouts that you're doing. That way you can exert your effort to the best of your ability to get the intention of that workout if you're running it. And if you are the coach, then you have a clear understanding of the benefits you're trying to get from the workout that you're prescribing to your athlete, and you can answer questions when they ask you those. So I think before I get into the interval rest periods, I should just quickly define what an interval is. So when I use that term, what I'm talking about is a period of faster running, really at any pace faster than your normal, easy jogging pace. It could be race pace or tempo, or anything. Usually it's going to be specified what pace you're trying to hit or what effort you're trying to hit. But some sort of a faster pace that takes moderate to hard effort. And because it is a harder effort, you are going to break up the bouts of running you do over the course of the workout, with recovery periods in there. So there are two types of workouts. One would be considered a continuous workout, something like a 3-mile tempo run, where you're running, let's say, 3 miles at 75% effort. An alternative to that would be an interval workout. Classic example would be maybe you're going to do 6 times half a mile at slightly harder effort, let's say 80% effort. If you're doing 6 by half a mile, you're doing the same volume as 3 miles steady, but by taking rest breaks in between, you can play around with the pace, with the effort, and get different effects from that workout while still running the same volume. So one of the main reasons why we use interval workouts is going to be because they basically allow you to do more volume of faster or higher intensity running than you could do just steady in a single session. And it's going to be a lot less load on your body to break up faster running into intervals than to try to do it steady. So just for example, running race pace is really quite hard. And the shorter you go in race distance, the harder it is. Often in training, even just running marathon pace, marathons being really the slowest race we do that has a set pace, marathon pace could easily feel like a 70% effort. On a warm day, and if you're running a lot of miles, it could feel even harder, especially if you're under quite a bit of fatigue. I often say marathon pace could feel like a 70% effort, 10K pace, maybe 80% effort, 5K pace, 85% effort, and mile pace, maybe 90% effort. And above that, you're kind of getting into middle distance events, 800 and sprinting. Marathon athletes, we do long, continuous workouts at marathon pace. But often we want to break up our workouts into intervals as well, especially if it lets us run faster than marathon pace. When I'm training folks for marathons, I often have them do long runs that grow over time in terms of how many marathon pace miles the athlete is running. I might have them start off doing 8 miles at marathon pace, and I grow that by 2 miles or so until they get maybe 3 or 4 weeks out from their marathon. And I often have them do 16 miles at marathon pace, steady without breaks, as one of their peak workouts before their marathon. But in the week itself, I'm having them do interval workouts. And those interval workouts are broken up in chunks. And by breaking up the workouts in chunks, they're able to run a faster pace, faster than marathon pace, and get as much volume as we see fit in a way where they couldn't do that if they were just running it steady. So for marathon athletes, half marathon pace to 10K pace, kind of what we typically think of as the threshold pace range, is good speed endurance work for the marathon. When you run in that pace range, you're going faster than marathon pace, but it's also hard to hold 10K to half marathon pace for very long. When I have folks training for the half marathon as a peak workout, I often have them do something like a 15-mile long run where it's 5 easy, 5 at half marathon pace, and then 5 easy. And I'll say, if you can do that, you can probably run your half marathon pace for the full 13.1 miles. It's really hard to run half marathon pace for much more than 3, 4, or 5 miles in training when you're under a heavy workload and not in a race environment. It comes easily, though, when you're properly trained on race day. So if we can't run more than, say, 3, 4, or 5 miles at half marathon pace steady in a single workout, or if we did, it would be super hard and cause a lot of need for recovery afterwards. It's totally doable to break that up. So my classic workouts for marathon training would be something like mile repeats at half marathon pace. And then perhaps next week you do 1.5 miles at half marathon pace. Week after that, perhaps 2 miles, and maybe as long as 3 miles for some athletes, maybe do like 2 by 3 miles as a really big workout at half marathon pace for some of my athletes. The interval is the fast period of running, and the recovery period is what allows you to rest between those fast intervals and ultimately do more workload in that single workout. By manipulating the rest period, you're able to change a lot when it comes to how the workout will be internalized in your body. There's a couple different types of recovery that you should always take a look at the workouts you're doing or the workouts you're assigning and think, is this one of these types of recovery? So really there's partial recovery and then there's complete recovery. Partial recovery is short rest. And complete recovery is full rest. For more endurance focused workouts, partial recovery is what you want to have. And for more speed focused workouts or final tune up workouts where you're just getting a feel for pace, maybe the week before a race, you want to have complete recovery. Workouts with partial recovery are not necessarily going to be harder than workouts with complete recovery. But in general, workouts with complete recovery are going to allow you to run each rep consistently and at the target pace and effort level. The intent of taking complete recovery is so that you can really prioritize the quality of each repetition that you're running and run it with the best form you can and the best speed that you can. You're not so much focused on endurance when it comes to complete recovery workouts. You're mostly working on the run part, getting more efficient at running fast and more comfortable with moving your body like that mentally and physically. With partial recovery, you're generally training endurance. So partial recovery workouts would be your heart rate's not fully come down between reps. You don't feel 100% recovered between reps, but you feel good enough to continue, assuming that you're modulating your pace effectively throughout the workout. Let's talk about specifically what this means. So partial recovery is typically going to be used in tempo workouts, marathon paced workouts, and VO2 max workouts. Basically, partial recovery is what we use for training endurance when the intensity of the work of the running is not super high, but high enough where if you take a short recovery and do a lot of volume, you're going to get good benefit. So I like to think of partial recovery as a ratio of time. So if the run of the interval is, let's say, 3 minutes, partial recovery would be really anything less than 3 minutes. So basically it's less than 100% of the run time. For tempo workouts, you really don't need much recovery at all. 1/3 time is actually pretty generous, and you can do a lot of volume with 1/3 time recovery. So this would be 3 minutes at tempo, 1 minute recovery. You could do a lot of reps, a ton of reps like that, and it would feel pretty easy. If you took more than 1 minute of rest, it would feel even easier. But kind of a 3-to-1 ratio is very generous for tempo. Many people go even more, even less rest than that, and that can be fine too. When I first started coaching, I did a lot of 5-to-1 work to rest ratio. That's just a bit less rest, and you may need to run your tempo intervals a bit slower, or the workout's going to be a bit harder from an effort level perspective if you do that. But 5-to-1 to 3-to-1 are good ratios for tempo. And there's no real magic with this or right way to do it. Basically, you're You're trying to strike the right balance of stimulus in your athletes or in yourself, and design the math of the workout to get there. When it comes to marathon paced intervals, so often with the marathon, I have people do steady, like 8, 10, 12 a marathon pace up to 16. But sometimes I have people break that up. Maybe they do 2x5 at marathon pace, and or 3x5 towards the end as a key workout. With this, you can be pretty generous with the recovery. Really, this is I would definitely take a partial recovery with it. Um, like those are some examples of what I've done. 3 miles marathon pace, 1 mile rest, 5 miles marathon pace, 1 mile rest. Marathon pace is not that hard, and you're also below lactic threshold, where the pace is not that strenuous on the body. And with marathon pace rest periods, I would say the rest is somewhat physical, but it's almost more mental. So the distance or the time that you're going to give for rest periods with marathon pace workouts is, I would say, actually more mental. Yeah. So if someone's saying, say someone's doing 30 minutes at marathon pace, what would be a reasonable mental break to give them? Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, I think would be pretty generous, but 5 minutes would probably be pretty good. It'd be enough time to kind of cool down a little bit, gear up mentally for the next 30-minute block. If you're doing I've had people do 2x8 miles before at marathon pace. 8 miles at marathon pace, depending on the athlete, could be an hour or more. For most of you listening, yeah, probably. So maybe 10 minutes recovery. It's really more of a mental exercise, I think, with that than a physical one, because your threshold, you're running below threshold when you're running marathon pace, especially for intervals. Certainly you'll get up to your threshold and near max heart rate by the end of a marathon, but probably not in a workout like this if it's controlled. But same thing with marathons, with marathon pace running. If you're someone who thinks running like 15 miles steady at marathon pace in a workout sounds very daunting, certainly can be, especially if you haven't worked up to it. But something like 3x5 miles with a mile recovery, or 5 minutes recovery, or 10 minutes recovery, can be mentally much more approachable. So that's kind of the thought process that goes into that with marathon pace and tempo. With faster workouts, so like VO2 max is 5K pace or slightly faster for most athletes, maybe like 3K pace, if you know what that is for you. You also want to do partial rest, but you're more generous with it. And I think that VO2 max workouts are something that a lot of times athletes get wrong because they don't take enough rest. VO2 max workouts are definitely the hardest to do when you take too short of rest. And they're pretty hard to do even when you take a lot of rest. You're basically running near max heart rate and trying to maximize your time at that. So breaking it into intervals is certainly a good way to do it, right? I mean, if the 5K is 3.1 miles, it's pretty hard to run more than 1 mile. Certainly trying to run more than 2 miles at 5K pace in a workout is pretty crazy. But a classic VO2 max workout training for the 5K or just trying to improve your VO2 max in general would be 3 by 1 mile at 5K pace with a certain amount of rest. With these workouts, I think doing equal rest of running time to rest time is a good starting place. And then if you feel like that's too much rest, you can shorten it. So let's just say hypothetically you run a mile, your VO2 max and your 5K pace mile is, let's say, 7 minutes. So the workout would basically be 3 by 7 minutes with a recovery. 1-to-1 would be 7 minutes fast, 7 minutes rest. That would be good. Now, 7 minutes rest probably sounds like a lot. And I think for that athlete, it probably is a bit more than they need to feel fully recovered. You'd probably going from like a partial to a full recovery when you do that. Though I don't think it would be completely full. But that would be a good workout, taking equal rest. I often will shorten this as much as like 50% of the runtime. So let's say you do your 3 by mile and it takes 7 minutes. So half of 7 minutes would be 3.5, 3:30. So 3:30, that would be a lot harder than 7 minutes of rest. I think for this specific athlete, I might have them do 3 by mile in 7 minutes and 5 minutes rest, kind of meet them in the middle. I hope as you listen to this, you're getting the sense that there's some basic formulas that help me determine the starting point, but I edit it, right? So take another athlete, maybe their 5K pace is really fast. Let's say 5 minutes, right? 3 by 5 with 5 minutes rest. That seems more reasonable for that athlete. They could probably cut that in half. That'll be hard. 5 minutes at mile pace and then 2.5 recovery. That would be a lot harder. It could probably be doable, but that would be a lot harder. I'd probably, with that athlete, maybe do 5 minutes fast, 3 or 3.5 recovery again for them. Often with these VO2 max workouts, after, let's say, like 3 minutes of rest, you're feeling pretty good and ready to go again. But again, it's going to depend on the athlete, right? Like someone running a mile in 5 minutes is going to feel different than someone running a mile in 8. The intensity level, though, of that faster athlete is going to be higher for the shortened amount of time that they're running. Whereas the intensity of the athlete running a bit slower will be a bit lower. So something to kind of keep in mind. Then when it comes to speed development workouts or repetition style workouts, you really want to have complete recovery. So complete recovery is when the amount of rest exceeds the runtime. This is usually used with mile-paced workouts for distance runners. It could also be used for VO2 max workouts if you are really just wanting to make it really easy on that day, but still get in race pace. If you're training for a 5K, for example, or if you just want to kind of neuromuscularly improve at faster paces. This is what complete recovery allows you to do. It allows you to rest as long as you want, essentially, so that between each rep, you feel fully recovered and you're able to come back and run the next interval with 100% ability, form, focus, no fatigue. So the way we calculate this is for mile paced repetitions, at a minimum, I usually give people 2 times the run time as a rest. So let's say you're running for 90 seconds at mile pace. You would take 3 minutes rest. If you were running for 1 minute, you would take 2 minutes rest. And if you are running for 2 minutes at mile pace, which is probably the upper threshold for what I would generally assign in a workout, you would be doing 4 minutes rest. So twice the amount of run time. And you can go longer than 2 times, especially if you're new to this style of faster workout, or it's a hot day, or you're just not feeling your best. Maybe if you're kind of recovering from an injury or being very careful with something you're feeling. You could do 3 times. You could even do 4 times the rest. The big thing with this is these workouts, when you're doing that much rest, there can be a good amount of just sort of standing around and killing time. I mean, they go pretty quickly, right? Because if you're doing, say, like 8 by 90 seconds at mile pace with 3 minutes rest, I mean, I guess that goes pretty quickly, but especially if you're getting up there in volume, these could take a while. And a lot of this time you're just sort of standing around and keeping loose, but the rest is very important, and it's not something that you want to rush on mile paced running. It's the same thing with strides. You don't want to be rushing the recovery with strides. The whole point of taking long recovery when you're doing this really fast running is so that your body completely settles down and recovers, relaxes, your heart rate comes down, your muscles have a chance to rejuvenate, the energy systems in your body recover, and you're able to do each one with equal or even better performance. Whereas with endurance workouts, depending on how you approach them, they may be getting harder and harder and harder over time. So that's complete recovery. And I think as it applies to distance runners, everything that I just said holds true, right? You have your complete recovery for mile paced running or faster, and there's no limit really to how long the recovery can be, because the whole point is complete recovery. So wait until you feel 100% or better. And then there's partial recovery, which is for VO2 max, threshold, and marathon paced workouts. And I gave some insight into how long that should be. Just as a refresher, because I know this is sort of a lot. When it comes to VO2 max workouts, I think 50% is a good starting point. 50% to 100 is a good starting point, right? So 3 minutes of run time would be anywhere from 3 minutes of rest to as short as 90 seconds rest. I think that's a good range. And if you wanted to make it more of like a neuromuscular speed workout, you would just take more than 100% time as your rest. Threshold workouts, you kind of want to be looking at as generous as 1/3 the time recovery, 33% of the run time, and maybe as tight as 1/5, 20% of the run time. And I often round these to what makes sense. So like if you were doing 5 minutes of tempo, you could be as short as 1 minute recovery, or you could be as much as 2.5 or three. Three would be pretty generous, but yeah, you could definitely do that. And then, how much recovery you're taking is going to help inform how fast you can run in the interval for a given effort. Often if you're taking more recovery, you can run faster, you can move your body quicker for lower effort in the workout itself. So more recovery is not necessarily a bad thing. Whereas shorter recoveries are going to allow you to have a more consistent movement pattern throughout, right? Like it's going to be more endurance focused. And for marathon paced intervals, when you're breaking up, 2, 3, 4 to 8 miles at marathon pace into different sets, I think that's probably more mental than it is physical. So, I would probably do like, if you're doing a certain amount of marathon pace miles, then maybe do a mile or 2 miles or 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the workout. It could be even longer, 15 minutes recovery. Really just enough to kind of mentally reset before you go to the next big interval. Okay, that's probably enough about the time for recovery with intervals. I talked about complete rest and partial rest. Next thing I want to talk about briefly is just standing versus jogging recovery or even walking recovery. I sometimes get questions from athletes on this subject. Why do we sometimes do standing rests? Why do we sometimes do walking rest? Why do we sometimes do jogging rest? And, to be kind of short about it, there's benefits to each. A lot of times it has to do with the environment you're training in or the convenience of the coach and what they choose and how they can best tend to their athletes or monitor what the athletes are doing. And often it has to do with the event that you're specifically training for. So generally, if you're training for longer events, like I would say for my audience, the 10K, half marathon, and marathon, generally, I would say jogging recovery is ideal. It's the most time efficient when it comes to getting in as much mileage in a single session as possible. And it's more specific to these longer events where you're going to be running for 40 minutes to 4+ hours without stopping. Standing rest is good when you're doing generally faster workouts or workouts with very short and controlled recovery. So standing rest I often think of is, say if you're doing 2 minutes or less recovery, you could do standing rest. If you're doing over 2 minutes recovery, it's probably best to move your body, walk, jog. If you're out on the road, a lot of times with like marathon paced workouts, you just jog through the recovery. If we think about fartleks are basically alternating fast and slow running and getting comfortable at modulating those paces. When we're training for half marathons and marathons, you need to get comfortable running continuously. So jogging recovery is ideal, I would say, especially if you're training solo and you're doing threshold workouts or marathon pace workouts. If you're doing VO2 max or mile paced workouts, you could do jogging recovery, but standing recovery can be good too. Sort of depends on where you're training. There's not really a right or wrong answer to this. Standing recovery is great when you're doing a track workout. Maybe you're doing 400s and you're doing short rest, you just start and stop and finish in the same place each time. Maybe you have a water bottle sitting there and you can walk over to your water bottle, take a sip during the rest period, and then get right back into the next interval. Even if you're just doing standing recovery, you do want to be moving your body a little bit. You don't just want to be like, just completely stationary. Moving your body is certainly going to help clear some of your blood lactate and keep your muscles feeling loose and getting you ready for the next interval. But there's not necessarily a need to jog, though you certainly could when you're doing these faster sessions where the focus is really on the fast interval and not on the recovery. When you're doing workouts with complete recovery or near complete recovery, do whatever you feel like you need to do in that recovery period to feel your best for the interval itself. Whereas when you're doing more workouts with partial rest, or you're doing interval workouts on the road that are more endurance based, jogging recovery is probably a bit more time efficient and a bit more ideal because you're getting used to keeping your body moving. For workouts with really short recovery, on the track, I think standing recovery makes the most sense. Like if it's a minute or less, but as I said before, if it's over that and maybe you can jog a 200 or maybe a 400, then jogging recovery could make sense. Not really right or wrong there. And then if you're being coached in person and the coach is actually there, it can be really helpful to, start and stop your intervals where the coach is actually standing. So a lot of times standing rest is actually just given by coaches because it's more convenient for them to have their athletes start and stop from the same place where the coach is standing. And it's good for the athlete because they can talk to the coach between intervals and get feedback on how things are going and share that with their coach as well. So for in-person workouts, you'll see a lot more standing rest than you will jogging rest. But for athletes training on their own, even if they're working with a coach, but they're out on the road or on a track training on their own, there are some physiological benefits to jogging recovery that you may want to take when it comes to these endurance-based workouts. The last thing I'll just say is if you are running on the track, you probably want to be starting and stopping your intervals from certain lines on the track, like the beginning of the 400 or out at the 200 mark. And you don't really just want to be starting and stopping intervals at random points based on time. So sometimes we do standing rest or kind of just like running in circles for a minute, just so you're starting and stopping at the same point. But I wouldn't really overthink that if you're the athlete. You'll be fine. It's not a huge deal either way. The last subject I just want to touch on briefly too is time-based versus distance-based recovery. So sometimes you'll see workouts where it's like the recovery is a minute jogging or standing or walking. Sometimes you'll see it where it's 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. And then sometimes you'll see it just not prescribing a specific time, but just giving a distance. So like 200-meter recovery, 400-meter recovery, or quarter-mile recovery, or mile recovery. When you see this, it's really just because the coach is being more general with the recovery time because they're not so concerned with precision on it. And they more want you as the athlete to focus on modulating your effort. So when a coach gives a specific time, right? Like you're going to do 400s with a minute rest. That's because they're trying to be very specific with it and what they're trying to get out of it. But if I gave 400s with a 400 jog between, and I didn't give the time of the recovery, That's because I want you as the athlete to think about the intent of this workout. Is it a threshold workout? Is it a VO2 max workout? Is it a speed development workout? And I'm giving you a bit of freedom and flexibility to gauge the recovery distance based on what you feel like you need to get the intended benefit out of it. And that's basically it. So it's a bit less precision coming from the coach, and a bit more freedom to the athlete, and a bit more freedom to the athlete and a bit more ability for the athlete to do what feels right on the day in the varying conditions that they may be experiencing. Both have their place. So that's been a wide-ranging discussion from me here on the recovery aspects of interval workouts and why we choose some of the recovery periods and distances and modes of running or standing that we do. I think that hopefully will give you a basic understanding of what coaches think about when they're designing the recovery aspect of interval workouts, and hopefully you can apply a bit more of this to your training, so you're ensuring that you are running workouts with intention. What I would ask for you as an athlete, as you're listening, is when you do your next workout, ask yourself, what is the point of this recovery period? Am I trying to get partial rest? Am I trying to get complete rest? And based on that, how should I go about handling my recovery period? And how should I pace myself knowing the intent of the rest period? When it comes to interval workouts, the rest period is as important as the running fast period, and they work in harmony to get the intended effect of the workout. Though the rest period is the time to rest and recover and should be easier than the running hard part, it's essential that you do it the way the coach intended, in the way that is feeling right on the day to get the intended benefit of it. If you don't do the rest period the way it was intended to be done, you'll get a very different result from the workout. So if you have any questions about rest periods when it comes to designing workouts, shoot me a message. Be sure you sign up for my email list, and that's the best way to stay informed of all the new content and episodes I'm releasing. Be sure you're subscribed on your podcast player to the Knighton Runs Podcast so you won't miss the next episode. And if you enjoy this show and want to support me in keeping these going, you can become a super fan on our Patreon page, which is in the link in the description. That encourages me to keep making these for you. Anyone who signs up to become a super fan on Patreon, if you have a topic idea or questions for the show, I'll prioritize answering those for you here. That's all I got for today. I hope your running is going well. And until next time, happy running.